A scorpion scuttles up to a worm. The worm is helpless to the whims of this predatory authority. It could fight or try to run away, but all roads lead to the same end, the worm's death. So it doesn't act at all, it plays dead, passively laying itself down to the immovable currents of power. And so the scorpion ignores it. An ossified worm is of no concern to him. Once the danger has left, a motorcycle violently rushes across the screen, crushing the worm. The question at the core of Megalo Box is laid bare in this short scene. Should you rebel against the unjust authorities of the world if you already know you are going to lose? You're only one person, only a worm in the grand and complex scheme of society, and even smaller against the world at large. And even if you survive by an escape or a small victory, either way you are still going to die. The forces of the universe demand it. First, let's look at what Joe, the Megalo Boxer and rebel at the core of the story, has to rebel against. Where does he come from? Despite his coach Nambu's echoing encouragements about his talent, Joe is constantly losing fights, but not by choice. He fights in the underground where the results are pre-decided to whatever's convenient for the money men at the top. And the dice always seem to roll against Joe as he throws fight after fight. The reason he can't go as far as his skill might take him is because he's an illegal immigrant, or at least lacks an ID, and therefore anything official is out of the question. So what else is he to do? He still has to eat. As much as Joe resents it, intentionally missing this incredible and flashy punch, only to show just what he could do if he was let loose, he doesn't really protest. Sure, he'll go away and sulk for the rest of the day, but he always comes crawling back to Nambu. As he puts it, it's not like he's got anywhere else to go. Joe exists on the periphery geographically and on the outside culturally of his country. He isn't bound by the idea of a national identity. The meta-narrative of conformity hasn't been passed down to him. Without that framework to place himself within, and being in what's the boxing equivalent of a dead-end job, of course he wants to fight against this. But Nambu is a lot older, and so he has a little more perspective on the situation. He puts it plainly, we know our place. Despite Joe ultimately living by this, he hasn't come near enough to peace with it to get close to saying it so explicitly. Despite the unquestionable wellspring of talent that resides in Joe, Nambu takes the softer path, the path of conformity. He's not aiming to push himself out of this seedy milieu, he's trying to reside in it the best he can, finding a sense of homeliness and familiarity in this of all places. He sacrifices dignity for practicality, like when the gangster he is in debt to, Fujimaki, gets frustrated by Joe's disobedience in the ring. Nambu creates a whole apology performance, whimpering and crying, until the need for this is over and he snaps back to his normal self. It might look unappealing, but if it keeps his life from spiraling into the depths of chaos, it's worth it. In a somewhat similar vein, when Joe finally gets to have a more serious fight, at the first sign of slight inferiority as he's knocked down to the ground, Nambu calls out to him, bellowing, "Stay down, stay down." He puts safety before freedom, before that slim chance to succeed. He keeps his bets low so he can stay in the game for as long as possible. But Joe doesn't see it that way at all. To him, that empathy, that attempt to prevent any and all excess pain, is not only stifling, but spineless. As he puts it in the very first line of the show, to be quiet, to do as you're told, that's the cowardly choice. The first time we see Joe throw a fight, it ends on this freeze frame of him halfway through the knockout punch, the fist moulding his face around it. Unlike Nambu, who accepts that kind of humiliation as a cost for a somewhat stable lifestyle, it bothers Joe a lot more. We hold on that frame for an uncomfortable amount of time. It's almost funny, but it's not. It's just sad. Abu Hachi, a guy who fixes up Joe's gear from every thrown fight, and his motorbike from every frustration-fueled ride straight after, tells Joe that his wife left him because he was too nice, and so he would always be poor. And he still is, years after the fact. Conflict is the tree on which the fruits of success grow. Joe is at the very bottom of the social hierarchy, and for him to climb up it, or more so to even break into it, he has to take this extreme route, dancing with death. Without putting his whole force into it, he'll stay like this forever. And Joe does have talent, he knows that, and it would be a disservice to himself to go any other way. Except, he doesn't actually know that, because his skills have never truly been tested. He's a big fish in a small pond. He realizes this in episode 1, when he gets the chance to fight with the Megalo Boxing champion, Yuri. One value of rebellion and trying to push above your predisposed place in society is that it shines a light of truth. Joe could be the greatest Megalo boxer of all time, but if he spends his whole life in the underground, he will never know. But there is a comfort in that. He can never be proven wrong, so he can rest on the abstract idea of his skill, as Nambu encourages him to do. But it seems that Joe is right to seek this truth, as Nambu shows how wrong it can go when you try to hide from it. His former student Aragaki was sent off to war, and upon hearing of his death in battle, Nambu couldn't face it. He couldn't hold that weight, and so he let him go. He utters, "I buried his life, just because it was convenient to me." He could not have missed his formerly deceased student not only being alive, but becoming a top 20 Megalo boxer. And yet, he refused to acknowledge it. If Aragaki survived and Nambu had never looked into it this whole time, he'd have done him such a disservice, one that he can't bear the responsibility of, so he looks away. But that doesn't work out. Even if you don't see it, the past is still moving forward. Aragaki, having been ignored and abandoned by his old teacher, builds a growing and feverish resentment for him. His drive for revenge manifests as a fervor to destroy Nambu's new student, who he sees as having replaced him, Joe. It's not just purely good to know the truth. How you deal with it has a much more significant impact on the direction your life is tilted. Aragaki is a mirror image of Nambu. He doesn't hide from the past, he lives in it. As we all do, the novelist William Faulkner put it best: the past isn't dead, it isn't even past. We live in a manifestation of our own and society's past. Every building a product of its time, every law and action of previously elected governments. We are surrounded by the past, that's all there ever is, and that's what everything now is soon to become. So it's only natural to be consumed by it. The same thing happens when Joe fights Mikio, who is bitterly obsessed with the pain his sister, the head of Megalonia, the big tournament everyone is moving towards, put him through. And much like with Aragaki, Joe wields those weaknesses as a weapon to knock them down. They both want to smash the past through the individual they've selected as emblematic of their trauma. For Aragaki it's Joe, and for Mikio it's Yuri, his sister's protege. But Joe looks above that, constructing his focus onto the here and now, the presentness of the ring. But all that really is a driven naivety, because simply put, Joe has the ability to ignore everything else, mostly out of luck. The only reason Joe is given even a chance to get to Megalonia, to get out of that insular and seedy world, is not from his heroic act of rebellion, when he first refuses to throw a fight, and brutally smacks down the man he was expected to lose to, but simply because it was convenient for Fujimaki, an effective strategy to net him some more cash. Joe doesn't know this, it happens behind closed doors, but it's ultimately a much stronger driving force in his rise than his own careless attempts to rebel. Their desires just so happen to align. Joe's really have nothing to do with it. If it wasn't better for Fujimaki, it would never happen. He would just be another stray dog, with his body left out on the street to rot. But Joe's focus on the moment also doesn't work for a less specific and more fundamental reason: the nature of human beings. Every person is an individual, isolated, solipsistic unit. We cannot communicate our consciousness. We can only attempt to by flailing through the small and overly rigid window of language. And being so locked into yourself comes at a cost, a struggle for self-awareness. There is no point of reference for your consciousness outside of itself, which can lead to a very nasty feedback loop of self-deception. This exact thing happens to Joe at his very first official Megalo boxing match. Instead of fighting, all he does is run away, trying to avoid being hit. Hardly an effective strategy for success. But his fear justifies itself to him. He confidently tells Nambu, "If I don't get hit, I can't lose. A delusionally narrow-minded thought process, to say the least. If you leave your inner workings to their own accord, they can justify anything. In this case, it's fear. He's scared to lose, so he'll try to avoid that in the short term, the future be damned. But at its very extremes, this transforms into an even more pernicious idea: escape through death. Both in the aforementioned first official fight and his previous fight with Yuri, Joe pushes himself to an excessive point. In the latter, even after he has lost the match, he still wants to fight, taunting Yuri by saying he couldn't even kill a stray dog. In that fight, Joe wanted to find the truth of his skill, but when it's revealed that his assumptions were at least somewhat arrogant and misinformed, he reacts by going so far it could only end one way. Deep down, he doesn't want to accept the failure, and so he subconsciously pulls himself towards the only alternative: death. Aragaki does the same thing. He plans to push himself over the edge and take Joe with him. Similarly, a deep part of him knows that destroying Joe won't wash away his past, and so he takes the easier option: success or death. To rebel is to fight against your very being. Every natural tendency of the human mind must be thrown aside to even start trudging against the wills of the world. And even if you do manage to break through that, stay out of your head without hiding from nor becoming stuck in the past, well, that's only the interior factors. The emissaries of this corrupt world still move around whilst you're not looking, and much like Aragaki emerging from the abyss of Nambu's memories, the past only continues to tighten its bind. After travelling such a distance, Fujimaki tells Nambu there is only so far you can go. He tells him that Joe must throw his first fight in Megalonia. It will be the biggest fixed match of all time. That's the only way Nambu can pay off his debts. He was like Joe once. He rebelled, he gambled for that slim chance of success, but now it's all caught up. You can run, but you'll never escape. Sweet dreams hurt when you wake up, Fujimaki postulates. No amount of hope for the future or presence in the now can bend reality. Yuri holds a similar idealism to Joe, an illusion of freedom, a stripping of context when you step into the ring. Despite Mikio's nepotistic ties to Megalonia, Yuri rejects him, saying only winners deserve to fight me. His blinders have been covering the exceedingly expensive megalo technology built into his body. It's not like this is purely meritocratic. Politics always bleeds in. Ultimately, Megalonia is a front for Shirato to show off these technological advancements. Everything else is secondary. Idealism is just an abstraction, a move away from the gritty, grainy, and endlessly complex world of reality. And in that world, there is only one ending: death. This looms over every moment of the show, every episode title having a variation of that word in it. From the road to death to a dead flower shall never bloom. Even if you aren't always conscious of it, its presence lingers. It's in the air. The worm may have survived the scorpion, but what difference did it make? Even if it had, against the odd, wrestled and defeated it, its life would still have been cut off. You can die fighting, or die anyway. At every point, Nambu keeps the risks as small as possible. They only needed to get to Megalonia for his debts to be paid off, so he aims exactly for that. No more, no less. He's trying to stay in the game for as long as possible, but the game never ends. Fujimaki continues to use him past the promised finale, and why would he ever stop if he's got something to gain? And yet, despite this hopelessness, Joe decides to push anyway. Fight against the endless tide of the past, himself, politics, corruption, the laws of the universe. One person cannot break those inevitable and eternal forces, but if you recede into them, as Joe tells Aragaki, you can blame whoever you want, but in the end, it's your call to make. It's your life, that's all you're ruining by giving up. So go for it. What have you got to lose that you wouldn't anyway? It's only as futile as anything else. So why not aim for the highest you can dream of? Why not put all your strength to try but most likely fail to reach for that slim chance of success? What else are you gonna do? After all, you're not dead yet. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this video. I really think it's one of my best so far. And it's also the video where I really worked out the kinks in my schedule. So there's plenty more videos coming very soon, and more of them. So look forward to that. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.